All right, well, welcome back to another episode of See Her Love's Summer of Strength series. And I am thrilled to have Senait Litchmore with me to strengthen you in so many areas of your life. Senait is a registered psychotherapist and Enneagram practitioner, which I love. And 3 children. We need to talk about that, how you're doing with that. And you just love encouraging women and men just through and empowering them. I love this. You empower others was birthed from your challenging lived experience and is sustained by your desire to break toxic generational patterns and empower women to step into the fullness of who they were created to be. Beautiful. So I'm excited to hear about you a little bit more, get to know you more tonight, and share your story and how you decided to become a psychotherapist and Enneagram coach. I love that kind of like, how did you always want that background so that our viewers and listeners can get that? Did you always think you were going to be a psychotherapist? But yeah, let's start with a bit of your story, some back to know you a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. So thank you for having me, Melinda. So my name is Senait. My parents immigrated to Canada, and a couple months before I was born, and they came from a small country called Eritrea, which is in East Africa. So they're fleeing a civil war.
Mm-hmm.
And so I grew up in a pretty tough neighborhood in Toronto. We lived in subsidized housing for most of my life. And, that really informed and kind of helped shape who I am today. I'm the oldest of 6 children. And so big sister duties as well too. And so my life was challenging, but it kind of caused me to become a fighter. So people know me, they know I'm a pretty strong person, and this is not a front, it's like really who I am.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it also helped inform this job that I'm in and this career path. And so it's funny when you ask, is this what you always wanted to do? Definitely not. I never thought I'd be a therapist. When I was in high school, I wanted to be a journalist, actually, because I like asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
I like asking challenging questions, really curious. And, I was on all the student clubs and all that. And so I thought that was that's where I was going to go. But what's interesting is that when I was a teenager, I was working with teens. While I was a teenager, I was working with other youth in the neighborhood, in the community centers, in the health centers. And so that's kind of where I fell into. Once I graduated from university, I continued to work with youth in the nonprofit sector. And then over time, I eventually fell into becoming a family therapist.
Wow.
And even though I was a family therapist, I was still working with youth. So I was working with families who had youth that were kind of behavioral, quote unquote, or out of control. And so I would come in, work with these families who lived in similar housing situations that I lived in similar locations. And so because of my lived experience, because of my experience and all that, I was able to come in not just as a clinician, but also as someone that can relate to both the parents and the children. And so I did that for some time, and I loved it. I loved being a family therapist, and I was like, this is my calling. When I entered the field, I knew I was meant to be a therapist, and there was no doubt about it. So that's kind of how I fell into becoming a therapist. Yeah.
That's really neat. I love hearing kind of the storyline. What would you say? Because, you worked with youth, and I love youth, and I'm challenged by youth all the time. I actually have 2,
Yeah.
We have a 15-year-old and almost 18-year-old. And so learning a lot from them for sure. They have no problem telling us what they think and how things should be done. But from your experience, what would you say, a Gen Xers, that youth are either most concerned about or are really looking for the generation above them to know about them? What were you finding as you talked with youth about their needs, desires,
Yeah. So the last time I really worked with youth was probably 5 years ago.
Okay.
I probably haven't worked with youth in the last 5 years,
Mm.
but prior to that, I worked with youth for a long time. And what I found is there's a lot of miscommunication. So where youth maybe feel like I'm not loved and I'm not seen, the parents feel like you don't appreciate me and you don't see
Mm.
everything that I'm giving you. And so there was a lot of like miscommunication.
Yeah.
And I think for me personally, I was so driven to kind of help bridge that gap because I wanted to be the person I needed when I was a teenager. And so if that meant working with parents as well as youth, I was willing to do that and kind of help with that mistranslation and that miscommunication,
Hmm.
and build that trust with the youth. And then also bringing in my knowledge and experience with the parents. And I found that like working with families was the most sustainable to helping youth with like long-term changes. Because prior to that, when I was only working with youth, I found that it wasn't sustainable. You know, once they go back to their home, they're back to their same environment, they were back into the, the same challenges they had.
Hmm.
But when you work with the parents, even though the parents didn't cause the issues or were not the source of the issues, they were definitely able to be part of the solution.
Wow. That makes
And
sense.
I just that yeah, yeah. Because parents sometimes are like, "Why are you working with me? I'm fine. I'm a perfect parent," even though those don't really exist.
Yeah.
It's like, even if you didn't cause this issue, you can definitely be part of the solution.
That's good. So miscommunication, you would say, was one of the big things, especially with
Um,
obviously with
huge,
kids and their parents. Yeah, I
huge,
can
yeah.
see that. I can see that. I can see how the lens and the way we interpret things can totally get we can totally miss it, right? Like
Yeah,
it's almost like you need like a translator sometimes
yeah,
to understand exactly what they're saying, what I'm saying. Because then when you don't hear it, or you don't know what they're saying, or you don't get it, or you're angry about it, then the emotions, right? Then you're yelling, or you're retreating, or you're walking away, or you're blaming.
yeah,
That's really
yeah.
good. That's
And
really good.
it's funny because like when I became a parent, my child's almost 9. So when I first became a parent, I was so confident. I was like, you know what? I worked with families for 5 years. I know all the things. Like
Yeah.
I'm going to be the best parent ever. And then life happened. I became a parent, and I was like, I don't know what's happening right now. Like I thought I knew it all.
Yeah.
Um, and it's funny because my daughter's so different from me. Like she was sensitive, she's very intuitive, she feels free to express herself. Meanwhile, you have me who's like, I'm strong, I'm self-sufficient, I'm able to push past any uncomfortable emotion. How am I now going to parent this child
Hmm.
who is so open to to expressing all of it freely and confidently?
Yeah.
And so how do I negotiate that? And I think that's kind of what led me on like my own journey of like personal development, is
Hmm.
really when I became a parent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Became like a bonus parent. How many years now? 6 years. Chris and I have been married, and then we dated for a number of years before. So I met the kids a year after Chris and I started dating. It was really important for Chris to make sure that we were serious before he introduced the kids to me. I think that was really wise
Yeah.
because we started dating, and so I didn't meet the kids for a year until after we were had dated. And I never really, in all honesty, I never really wanted children. It was something even when I was young. I went back to my parents. I said, "Did I ever want kids?" They're like,
Mhm.
"No, like you were out saving the world with you were carrying a flag in, in kindergarten, and all the kids were following you, and the teacher was like, 'What are you doing, Melinda?' I'm 5. I'm like, 'Oh, I'm saving the world. We're figuring out how to save the world as
Wow.
we march the playground.'" But I never
Oh, wow.
played house dolls, anything. Like it was not anyway. So I thought Senait, my life was just like no children, kind of living my life, doing my thing, and then met Chris and was like, oh wow, he's bringing kids into this picture, and it was hard at first because you're kind of like, oh, I have to like open my heart and figure this out. But I would say it's probably one of the biggest learnings for me. It's
Mhm.
not easy; it hasn't been perfect, but I think for me, another level of love and knowing about myself has come with the kids. And has come
Wow.
through the kids, and that's been an unexpected growth and learning for me as a woman. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I would say definitely kids change everything.
I love when you said knowing myself,
Hmm.
because like I think that was a big thing for me. Like, I thought I knew myself and I thought I knew what kind of parent I was going to be, but I forgot about all those like broken pieces
Yeah.
that were unexamined that I thought I was okay with.
Hmm.
And, you know, I came in like, you know, I'm not going to parent this way and that way. I'm not going to do what my parents did. And these are the things I am going to repeat. But then I'm like, I didn't know all this other stuff existed. And it really forced me to like know myself.
Yeah.
And it was just, even until this day, like it's just really uncomfortable
Oh,
sometimes.
yeah. And there's more
Yeah.
things as I go through seasons and every birthday, as a woman, as I'm, knowing and growing. Yeah, it is a lifelong. And when people say that, when I was in my 20s, like, lifelong journey of knowing yourself. That's too long, like I'll know myself by 35, right? But in every decade and season, it's like this, like, wow, that is still a cyclical thing. That is still a broken part that seems to come up, and I really need to examine that. And a lot of times, there have been times, and I still do, where
Hmm.
it's uncomfortable to be with yourself. Sitting with yourself sometimes isn't great. So you
Yeah.
distract and you distract and do other things. So you're not face to face with yourself. But I think as I've gotten older, I've found more and more comfort, and love for myself in that way, that I can sit with myself and enjoy me, be okay.
Yeah.
Versus a lot of
Yeah.
times I'm like,
Yeah.
don't want to be with me. And so, which sounds so strange, but it's true in that. So tonight,
And I think a lot of people can relate to that.
I don't think
Hmm.
sometimes when I've talked about it with my girlfriends, sometimes they haven't identified it as that they're afraid to be with themselves quietly, because that means that there's a self-examination. But as we've talked about it, they're like, I think at the end of the day, I think that is, there are things that
Hmm.
I don't want to address or don't want to bring up. So I run away through things, addictions, through escapism, through all kinds of things.
Netflix.
But it always keeps coming back. So,
Yeah.
yeah. The past 2 years tonight, through a pandemic, through lots of things, what would you say that you've learned about yourself and God? I really love this because I ask everybody this, like, what did we learn through the pandemic? Good, bad, ugly, but I think all of us have some takeaway from these past 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, for me, like when the pandemic, before the pandemic started, I was like, you know what, I just had my third child and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna be a stay-at-home mom. I'm gonna take some time off work. Like we had the financial means to do that. And so when the pandemic hit, it was actually great. Like the first couple months, like I
Hmm.
was not as tired. My husband was home. He's helping. I don't have to do all these drop offs. And so I was really enjoying it. And then Mother's Day in May 2020, my dad passed.
Hmm.
And that was like, whoa, I'm like, that was really challenging. But the gift with the pandemic is like, it forced me to grieve. I had nowhere to go. You know, I'm
Hmm.
this extrovert, busy person. Then all of a sudden I'm like, God's like, no, no, you're gonna face this. You're gonna sit here. You have nowhere to go. You're stuck in the house. You're stuck with your four people. Um, and you're gonna meet me. And I
Hmm.
think I don't even think I fully grasped, to be honest, like how that has impacted my life. But what I know is that it was such a gift because I don't know where I would be if I didn't have the pandemic during that grieving period. I probably would still be in the thick of things,
Hmm.
versus like being on the other side. So that was, in that sense, that was good. And so with the pandemic, I kind of like reevaluated who I am. Like I even tell myself like there's like a pre-pandemic Senait and there's like a post-pandemic
Yes.
Senait. Like
Yes.
yeah, and
I
like
get you.
it's
I feel that way too.
yeah, it's like it just gave me this time where it's like I never had this much time. I never had this much space.
Hmm.
Um, and so I took it as an opportunity to do some personal development. And so that's kind of where the Enneagram came in. So I started looking into like what's my number. That was very hard for me to like recognize. I'm an 8, so I'm the challenger.
Hmm.
And then I did coaching. I did Enneagram coaching for a whole year, where every single month I worked through some goals, and these were not big goals. These were like
Hmm.
simple things like being more vulnerable, inviting people into my mess. Like things that, hopefully we should all be doing, but they were so challenging for me, extremely challenging for me. And so having that space, having that time, having that access, it kind of like it brought me back to myself, but it's myself, but also this more mature, self-aware person. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
like past and post kind of came together and then created this like new version of me that I'm still kind of getting to know. But I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if I would have gotten that opportunity if it wasn't for the pandemic and like facing loss and facing myself.
That's really good. I'm sorry to hear the loss of your dad.
Yeah.
That would have been hard, especially during that time.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely was. And I think even as the oldest, I'm like, I'm the
Mm-hmm.
one that did all the funeral arrangements and did it all. And so
Mm-hmm.
if we were not in a pandemic, I probably wouldn't have had that opportunity to breathe,
Yeah.
to really grieve. But I did. And it was, yeah, it's, yeah,
Yeah.
it's all the things.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting when I've been talking to a number of people through interviews or just over dinner and hangouts. There have been a number of people who acknowledging the pain and the loss and grief of the pandemic, as well as what you've said, good good things coming from it, moments and space to grieve, to think, to ponder, to reevaluate, which really says a lot about us, right? That pre-COVID, we were at such a pace that we couldn't even do these things that seem so basic, like, oh, now I can go for a bike ride. I
Yeah.
can, for me, it was learning how to cook. I hated cooking. And for, during COVID, you couldn't go out to restaurants. So it sort of forced me to go, okay, what's this cooking thing about? Why is it so fun for so many people? And then
Yeah.
going, oh, it is quite a creative outlet. Or
Yeah.
me picking up the ukulele and our family playing music and posting it on Facebook for the enjoyment of others and to the absolute horror of my kids, singing songs, but ukulele, like that's something I remember seeing my husband's musical and it was on his shelf and I was like, oh, I should do that one day. Oh. And then never did it for years and then had the space to do it. But then it was more about why am I not choosing to do those things? Why
Mhm.
am I so busy with other more important things or distractions that I'm not doing these things? And so I'm hearing that a lot. And I wonder that in the next little while, we're going to see books or papers about some of the good things for people that have come out of this, that allow people to have family dinners together and not running around, to all the things, right? Like to be more creative, to meditate more, to do artwork, to whatever it was, right? And also, even just like when we were going through it, so many people stopped by with little gifts for us and food gifts and
Yeah.
plants and those were things that I'm like, I wish. I mean, I received them well. I loved it, but why are we not a people always doing that for our neighbors and people, dropping off gifts and food and
Yeah.
things that might, like. So as you say this, I'm like, there have been some great benefits, some great pauses and moments that I think have helped many of us just take stock of our life and go, okay, wait, prioritize and priorities,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
And obviously there were definitely a lot of hard moments,
Oh, yeah.
extremely hard moments. And I just don't think we even have grasped like the impact the pandemic
No.
has had on us, right?
Yeah. And I agree. I think that it's that where there has been a lot of loss and people felt isolated and mental health. I mean, I talked with two men yesterday who, the pandemic wasn't good for them for their mental health. And they're still in recovery about that. And what that did as far as, their thinking and things like that and plans and stuff. So yeah, I think that is good for you where you're saying it gave you space to grieve.
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
and to really experience that and grieve and process.
Yeah.
It's good. It's good. Uh, you know, we talked a lot about how um, your passion is to empower others, was birthed from your challenging experience, sustained by desire to break toxic generational patterns and empower women to step into the fullness of who they were created to be. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
always, you know, over the years on See Her Love, we talk a lot about family of origin as the beginning of where many of us formed our thinking and belief systems, you know, about ourselves,
Yeah.
about others, about the world. Can you talk to me about that a little bit? Like, we use that, we just say family of origin. Yeah, our family of origin made that happen. Our family of origin, we blame our family of origin, right,
Right.
on who we are today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but I have never actually really talked to anybody like a psychotherapist to really kind of help us process just really what we're saying, that there is truth to that, or maybe we need to like change language around it too. But I know that that's been a big conversation piece for the past 5 years of See Her
Yeah.
Love.
Yeah. It's a buzzword right now. Like that,
Mm-hmm.
breaking cycles, breaking generational cycles. It's a buzzword. It's what everyone's saying. But I think even before going into it, I think we need to really recognize that most of our parents, if not all of them, did the best they could with what they had. You know,
Mm-hmm.
most parents, most adults are cycle breakers. Most people have decided to do something differently, whether it's giving their kids something that they didn't have, showing up differently.
Hmm.
And so I think to a certain extent, all of us are cycle breakers. You
Hmm.
know, like it's
Um,
even if we had like a challenging childhood, if we were like to look back at our parents' childhood, it was probably more challenging than ours was.
mm-hmm.
And so, even recognizing that, I think is helpful because I think in some cultures, I know in my culture, you know, saying something bad about your parents is really dishonoring. You know, in the Christian culture, you know, we are really taught to honor our parents. And so when we say something wasn't given to us, or we're going to do something differently, or we didn't like how things were done, it could be seen as dishonoring. And many people can experience a lot of guilt.
Hmm.
But what
Hmm.
happens sometimes is like that guilt could also prevent us from recognizing the harm that was caused, which can also prevent us from healing.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And
I'm s-
so like it's it's a big topic, right? These like breaking
mm-hmm.
cycles, it's a big topic. And but I think starting there where it's like they did the best they could with what they have.
Mm-hmm.
To break cycles, you don't have to confront your parents. You don't have to have a sit down and a family discussion. You know,
Mm.
healing and changes can happen without confronting your parents who did the best they could with what they had.
Wow. Would you say, like, if you're self-examining yourself and knowing yourself,
Hmm.
I guess the question is like, how much is on family of origin and parents, and how much is it on you choosing just bad behavior, choosing things that are destructive? Do you know what I mean? Like, I always
Yeah.
wonder, is it a percentage like 50-50, or that's not the right way to do it? Or, you know what I mean? I'm trying to like process that because
Yeah.
I'm just getting, my mind is sort of like spinning a little bit and
Yeah.
processing.
I mean, I don't know, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
everyone's different. I think it could be there's different factors that form us. And so for sure, like our parents and how you know, our the culture in our home, how our parents had relationships with each other, with other people, with us, how they lived their lives, but also like genetics, you know, our life experiences, systemic issues also impact us and how
Mm-hmm.
what we see as truth and what we see as yeah, as even in our identity. And so there's various factors, and I think they impact people differently.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely the research does show that like parents really have the biggest impact, normally or usually, in terms of particularly like how we see ourselves and then how we function in relationships with other people.
Wow. So if there are some things where you're like, oh my goodness, because how many of us have said, oh, I never wanted to be my mother, say what my mother did, and then we find ourselves literally saying the
Yeah.
exact things
Yeah.
that your mother said
Yeah.
or did that would drive you crazy when you were younger, and you would swear, never would I do that. I will never do that. And then you find yourself doing it. Which,
Yeah.
I mean, I did the same thing, and I now do things like of my mom, and I'm like, and then it shocks me. Or like Chris will say, oh yeah, that was so your mom. And some of it's good, and some of it's a bit of the more challenging things. But how do you break the challenging, maybe bad things in that? Like, how do you, like where you're saying, you're breaking the cycle, because it's not
Yeah.
easy. It can't be easy
No.
to say, I'm not going to
Or
do
else
that anymore.
we'd all be healed and just,
Right.
running in the meadows, just
Right. A
eating the
little sound
rainbow.
of music. Yeah.
Yeah,
Doing our thing. Right.
exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah, I think was really challenging, even talking to my friends and my clients. Like, we are so bombarded with like what's right and what's wrong,
Hmm.
So, we find ourselves like yelling at our kids or criticizing them. It's like, oh, this is wrong because you saw the Instagram memes and you read the books and these things are wrong. And so we
Mm-hmm.
like overdiagnose ourselves. And I just find that so many of us are like living this place of guilt where it's
Hmm.
like, I'm not doing enough. I can't believe I'm doing this, because we know what's wrong and what we shouldn't do.
Right.
But I think what happens is like we move too fast from like self-diagnosing to doing something about it. And we
Hmm.
forget about like the compassion and like the validation part. And so I think to break cycles, I think the most effective way, in my opinion, is through reparenting. And so reparenting is this concept where you are showing up for yourself to be the parent that you needed in that moment.
Wow.
And to take it a step further as Christians is actually like reparenting and allowing God to be that parent that you need in that moment.
Hmm.
And so let's take like a small example. Let's say you forget your keys to enter your home. And so, what do you say to yourself in that moment? Do you beat yourself up and be like, I can't believe I forgot my keys again. I'm so stupid. I'm so irresponsible. What's wrong with me? I always do this. Like, I'm immature.
Hmm.
Or do we speak to ourselves as a parent that we need in that moment with compassion and with grace? How would God speak to us in
Hmm.
that seemingly like, minor moment? Would he shame us and criticize us? Or would he remind us that we could get a new copy of our keys, and that it happens, and people make mistakes, and that's okay.
Hmm. So it's like in situations, that kind of speaking kindness and compassion to ourselves versus the shame and judgment and condemnation that many of us
Exactly.
tend to do.
Exactly. And many of us might have heard our parents overly criticizing us in certain situations. Um, and and it might have been from a place of fear. It might have been from a place of trying to instill responsibility in us, trying to help us mature and grow. And they did it in a way that they were familiar with. And that's what they did with themselves. That's what they knew. But sometimes it wasn't helpful, and
Mm.
sometimes it was harmful. And
Hmm.
so instead of repeating that cycle and talking to ourselves in that way and talking to our kids in that way, changing it is it's really about awareness. Like, what
Hmm.
am I saying to myself right now in this moment?
Hmm.
Is that what God would say to me? Is this how God would speak to me?
Hmm.
And then changing that inner voice slowly.
That's good. I'm writing notes. I'm writing notes down. That's really, really good.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's really about, it's like we're missing the compassion part, because, and I think why we are is because we're like we're a fast-paced culture, like we want to do
Yeah.
all the things, we want to be productive, we're on the go, and so there's no time for compassion. There's no time to slow down and give yourself love because you
Hmm.
forgot your keys. Like, it's like, what am I, a child? Like, why am I having
Yeah.
to console myself because of this small? And then we beat ourselves up. Like, it's just keys. Like, why do you care? Move
Yeah.
on. But we need compassion in that moment. And
Yeah.
if we don't slow down, we're going to miss that important piece.
How do you then, like, this is a big loaded question, and maybe it's
Hmm.
just, but if your family of origin was just really horrible, how do you reconcile and make peace and show compassion, kindness to your parents where you feel like they've harmed you or they've hurt you? How do you begin that? Because, I know over the years, a lot of people have written in, or friends who are like, I just can't.
Yeah.
But then I see Senait, like, them living out still in the pain and unforgiveness, right? Of not acknowledging or forgiving, their parents in that place, right? Like, I know it's big, but it's just like, how do you start that? How do you take a moment, give yourself compassion, and maybe give your parents compassion as well?
Hmm.
Because that's hard for some people,
Yeah.
right? Like, it hasn't been a great childhood.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
been pretty lousy,
Yeah. I don't think it's the same for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was challenging for me. I did have like a challenging, especially my teenagers was very challenging, and I didn't know I'd ever get to that point, and I allowed
Mm.
myself that grace that I might not get to that point. Um, and even getting to that point almost felt like a miracle, and I don't think there was for me like a 5 or 10 step program. Um, I think what was the most helpful for me is really seeing God as my parent, right? Really seeing God as my
Mm.
mother and my father.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I'm so grateful to be a believer, and I'm so grateful that we have that access, and that and I, like that God even calls himself father, like he could have called himself brother, cousin, all the other titles, but he's like, no, like I know that parent wounds are the deepest. He knows that
Mm.
when you have that parent wound, it has the biggest impact than any other wound on our emotional well-being.
Yeah.
And God was like, I'm going to be that perfect father because you
Yeah.
need me. And that's like such a precious gift. And I think how that plays out for people isn't the same, how they allow God to show up as a parent. But I think that that is actually a key piece to healing as believers, is
Mm.
really inviting God and allowing him to love us unconditionally, because we all deserve that. We all
Yeah.
deserve unconditional love. And unfortunately, like when we grow up in these rough or have rough childhoods, we believe that our love is conditional. The love from our parents is, even if it wasn't, we believe
Mm-hmm.
that it's like, if you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. And so
Mm.
then you build a story where it's like, you don't love me unconditionally, but then being like, whoa, but God does. And
Yeah.
God has proven that time and time again. Um, but I don't think people should be like, I have to forgive, or I have to have compassion. I have to have a relationship with them. I do
Mm-hmm.
think that's the best thing is to forgive and to be on that path. But how you get there, when you get there, is is a journey.
Yeah.
And I
That's
think
a good reminder.
giving yourself grace is key.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I think, and as you're saying that, I've had conversations where a lot of people felt love, especially their parents, was transactional, right? Like,
Yeah.
I will love you if you do. I
Hmm.
will support you only if you. And
Hmm.
so grades, sports, all the things, like
Yep.
being quiet, being the perfect child, not being contentious. So
Hmm.
all of these people, and now we're adults and we're like, why are we doing this? And then you go, because it was always, love will be given if you're this. I will show you love. I will value you if, but I think that's beautiful. I think you're right. I think for a lot of people, it's the journey is different and the timing is different, in that place of, when we address parent wounds. That's really good. And I love the God is mother and father. Absolutely. All
Yeah.
the mother traits and all the father traits all in one,
Yeah.
right? So the
Yeah.
nurture to the protector to the discipline to the encourager, like all of the things of
Yeah.
mother father is in God in
Yeah, the
that. And that's,
consistency. Yeah.
yeah, it's
Meeting our
beautiful.
needs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Seeing us, that
Mm-hmm.
sense of belonging, like we belong in God's family and I don't have to do anything to earn that. And there's nothing
Right.
I can do to lose
Mm-hmm.
that. It's like he loves me despite myself.
Yes,
It's just
please.
so
Yeah.
powerful.
And what a message tonight. Like part of, when people are like, why do you follow Jesus? um, because that in and of itself is so beautiful and so healing that could follow somebody who is that, who loves you despite and doesn't throw it back on you.
Yeah.
It loves you because you're his. He created you. You're, it's so beautiful. And what a message if we were able, even for myself, to speak and show that. I think a lot more people would be like, oh, Jesus, yeah, I want to follow this Jesus. I want to
Yeah.
be a part of this family of belonging, right? It's
Yeah.
really beautiful. You also talk a lot tonight about this rewriting your narrative. I think we're kind of coming into that as we're talking about this. I love that. I've always loved that.
Hmm.
Um, it's quite empowering. This rewriting our narrative is quite empowering to anybody who thinks that they're stuck in their narrative
Yeah.
and can never get out of it. Um, and so let's just talk a little bit about that, because I love this, that we can rewrite our narrative so we can impact us. So there's impact on us and change on our families, communities, and future generations. So you're speaking my language all about that, about ourselves, about our neighbors, and then the next generation when we do that.
Hmm.
Um, what does that mean? What does that look like in rewriting our narrative?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, we all like life is built on stories, right? We all tell ourselves stories from our childhood,
Hmm.
stories about why things happen to us, why we are a certain way. Like we build them up. And so I think before we get to even rewriting our narrative, like we definitely have to be aware of like what our narrative is. And this could be like, we have big themes, like the roles in your life. What are the main narratives, that you're a speaker, that you're a parent, that you're a wife. These are narratives. But then there's smaller narratives that
Hmm.
sometimes have patterns, So every time you don't get a job after an interview, what's the narrative you tell yourself? That I'm not good enough, that I'm not good at this job, or that, maybe it wasn't the best fit for me, or maybe you're overqualified. Like, what is that narrative? And so
Hmm.
when we take the time to be aware of the stories we tell ourselves, I think that's when we can start walking into like the rewriting our narrative. And it's also why I love the Enneagram. I feel like the Enneagram almost gives you like a free kind of like insight where you don't have to do as much of the work and looking for patterns, like
Hmm.
finding out what your number is. And it's like, wow, like this is a story that I'm telling myself, that I can be vulnerable, or I always have to be optimistic, or I need to achieve to be loved. And when we
Hmm.
realize these narratives were that are playing out, then we can start to challenge them. Like, where did this come from?
Hmm.
Who told me this? And I think that's a really important place to live in and to be in and spend time in, before that next step of then replacing it with, a more realistic narrative.
Hmm. That's good to know. I
Yeah.
I think too many of us are locked in Like, even we even say it like, well, this is my lot in life. Well, I guess this is, this is my life. And,
Yeah.
it's interesting, like, what I've been doing, See Here Love, we've talked a lot about choice. Like, you need to choose. Like, you can't just pray to God about something and then do nothing,
Yep.
because it does, you have to take action or change or choose or love. Like, you can't. And I think growing up in the church for me, Senait, it was like, there was that part where it's like, well, I'll just pray and it will happen. Like, my heart will just change. My heart will
Yeah.
just turn miraculously, in the middle of the night. And, you know, well, that theology and understanding is just not good at all. But I think this idea of intentionality and choosing is really important. And in my own faith of following Jesus, it's like, but you're not doing it alone. Very strong sense of God's Spirit present and leading, and it's wild when it's like, well, those, I write something down and those words, I don't even know where they came from, but that's exactly what I needed. Or a person will come to me and say, Mel, I prayed for you last night, or I have a verse for you, I have something,
Yeah.
which have all been parts of, like, even for me changing my narrative. If I had stayed in my narrative, I would have stayed, in my teen years as a prodigal daughter. And I don't know where I'd be now. Even in growing up as a Christian, made really poor choices and, like, really went away from God for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people who followed Jesus and love him, reached out, and my parents and key people who said, we still see him in you, and we still see the beauty in you and the possibility. So we're not going to give up on you. And
Wow.
they actually also helped to change the narrative, because they believed in me enough when I didn't believe in it for myself. Right?
Wow.
There are times where I'm like, I see this. I see me in the pig pen with the scraps, and I don't know where. I knew where it would lead tonight, and it wasn't pretty. And there were people who believed in helping me change the narrative to where I am today. There's so much. I mean, I am thankful. I'm like, my story is totally about the grace of God, but it's also the love of
Mm-hmm.
community and people. And
Yeah.
then me saying, I'm going to choose them to make these different decisions for my life. And I
Wow.
don't think a lot of people, people see me now. It's like, oh, Melinda has platform. Look at Melinda, life, fun life,
Yeah.
great life. And it's like, it's good. It really is. And I am grateful every day for my life and what God has given me to steward well, and to steward with great humility. And, I'm in awe about, where I'm at. But years before, it would not, nobody, I would say, if you ask people who knew me in my teen years, they would not have projected this at all, the
Wow.
way I was headed. So,
Yeah.
and I have to remind myself, it's important for me to remember that, and then remember the steps that it took. I'm not sit there, I don't dwell in that and sit in there, but
Mm-hmm.
it's good to be reminded that it was people and my choice, and then God really doing what he does best in intervening and finding me. And so I love what you're saying, because I really get it.
And I love what you said. You kind of even answered the question yourself. Like, we rewrite our narrative with other people. Your
Mm-hmm.
community helped you rewrite your narrative. And, obviously I think therapy is great, but I think sometimes, or what has happened in our culture, which is a very individualistic culture, is like we've placed too much emphasis on like personal development and like
Mm-hmm.
one-on-one therapy, when what's the point of all the therapy and the coaching in the world if you're not going to put it into practice in community?
Right.
You're not, the
That was
knowledge
well
is
said.
not going to be, is not going to live inside of you, and you won't be able to live out what you learn. And so did you really learn anything, or was it just like in one ear or out the other? Or do you just sit in guilt knowing that
Mm-hmm.
these are things you have to do and you're not doing it? But, in order for us to really put things in action, we need to do it in community. And
Yeah.
you've demonstrated that, like, even being vulnerable and allowing other people to know what your narrative is huge, right?
Oh,
Because huge, huge.
especially in the Christian circles. I mean, there are so many times, right? Like, when I was going through my depression, that was a huge part of my life where I'm like, how can I be going through a 6 to 8 month depression when I have the Holy Spirit in me as a Christian? And there's a lot of shame around that, but I invited people in. When I went through my divorce, when my husband left me, that could have been a whole different narrative. And yet there were people who were like, nope, nope, nope,
Wow.
nope. Even though you were unchosen, even though you feel and you were abandoned and rejected, that is not who you are. That is not how you live. That is not the truth
Amen.
of who you are.
Amen.
And so I think you're right. Like, as you say this, it's so good because I think I could have remained in that narrative of the circumstances and what people have said,
Mm-hmm.
but there was, like I said, people speaking that over me, God speaking that over me through scriptures, and then me going, okay, I have a choice. I can believe this or continue to believe
Yeah.
the lie of being unchosen. What am
Yeah.
I going to do?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And that's huge because what happens is like when a problem happens to us, let's say we're experiencing depression, we are experiencing something like a divorce, anything big,
Mm,
we own it as our identity. When I love this saying, it's the problem is the problem. Like you are not the problem.
that's good.
So like here's the problem and then here's you. When we
Hmm.
own the problem as our identity, that's when we start to say like I'm not worthy of love. I'm not worthy of being married because look, see, I just got divorced. But it's like no, no, no. This is something that happened. It's not who you are.
Hmm.
And so we
Yes.
have to like create space because and that's not what God calls us. God didn't put those identities on us either. But
Hmm.
I really think our bodies do that as a way to protect ourselves. It's like, okay, like it's what are the problems and how can we make sure this doesn't happen again? How do we defend ourselves? And so it focuses a lot on the problem and then it becomes bigger and it has more control and power than it deserves over our life. But when we give it like the appropriate space where it's like, no, you're just something that happened, but you're not who I am. That's how we ward off and like reject these like false narratives that try to like impose themselves on us.
Yeah. So
And
good.
and
I
it
love
sounds
the,
like that's exactly what you did.
not easy. I mean, so not easy. And even as a follower of Jesus, it was like you would think I'd be like, okay, go to God and whatever. And it's
Yeah.
like there were so many like battles and things. And then I was like, God, do I trust you? Because look what happened. But I'm not blaming you. I'm blaming me. But can't hear you. And yet when I look back now, wow, he was there the whole time. There were times where I think, and I say this like God is silent in the way that you may need, right? Like for me, it was like I wanted immediate answers and immediate results, but actually the greatest lessons were through some of the greatest pain. The greatest
Wow.
lessons were when I was in great pain and I had come to the end of myself and nobody was there in the sense of like they had been there for me, but they couldn't take me all the way. There was
Hmm.
then me having to really be like, it's me. Okay, God, me and you and me and those quiet, hard places. And I think
Yeah.
pain grows you. I hate it, but I am not the same person. I'm not the woman I am today without it. I
Hmm.
lots of growth through it. Hard, but
And
I
how do
believe
we
I'm so
like
much
how
better
do
for it.
we yeah, how do we talk about that more in the church? Because we all just believe this like we have like a miracle working God, but yes, but is it like miracle working God overnight? Is it a
Right,
miracle working God with one prayer? Sometimes. But what about those stories when that doesn't happen?
right. And
It's
then you
like
see when
we
it doesn't happen, then people are like, "Oh yeah, God, see, I'm angry at him. He doesn't answer." But then you're actually asking God to be a genie and be at your beck and call and whim, and that's not the relationship.
Mhm.
Like,
And yeah, and that's our culture right now, right? We want everything fast. We want instant gratification. We have less patience. We don't know how to wait, and so we're treating God that way. It's a reflection of where we're
hmm,
at, and so it's almost like we have to, as a church, like we have to remind ourselves, like we are, like we're not of this world, and so the patterns and our expectations, like, have to really reflect God and who God is, as opposed to what we want and what's comfortable and what's easy and natural.
Right.
Yeah.
No,
It's funny
that's
because
good.
even when I was doing like my Enneagram coaching for the year, I was like, okay, am I better now? Like, like, am I fine? Like, why am I still doing this? You know, like I'm a therapist. I should like know all the things and, you know, work on personal development a lot faster. But I had to remind myself, it's like I've really believed this. I've been immersed in this culture of instant gratification so much. I don't know what it feels like to slow down, take my
Yeah.
time, to heal slowly, to get to know myself at a slower pace, and that it's not a race. There's no prize at the end, you know. It,
That's so good because, we actually were talking about this, my husband and I. We sound so old, but we were telling the kids about the days where we had to line up at record stores to get tickets for a concert. Like that's literally like our age, where we'd have to go to Sunshine Records or HMV in the
yeah.
day, and we would line up. We'd skip school to get tickets, and there was this anticipation and excitement about waiting and then going to the concert, you know what I mean, and lining up, and
Mhm.
that kind of like, and we were saying how we've missed it because now kids can go online, get it, or get the song right away, or just, you know what I mean, like there is a change in that. And I think it's the same way of the process and the waiting. There's something good and deep about that for our own souls and for us, that it's not overnight, that healing takes is a process. Grief is a process. Growing is a process. And
Mhm.
I believe more and more at this age and stage of my life, it's because you learn the most in that. You
Yeah.
can hear God. He's speaking to you as you're growing, as you're processing, as you're waiting, and you're learning new things about Him and yourself and the world as you do.
Mhm.
And I know that I've seen that, like there are times where I'm like I want things really fast and I
Yeah.
get very impatient, and this is a good conversation actually because it's again a reminder of me to wait and hold space for the process, for the waiting, for what God will do, in that. It's good.
Yeah.
This was timely. It was good for me. I have to remind myself that because I am a production, broadcast, content creator. Let's make it go. Let's make it happen. We got to put it all out there, right?
Yeah.
It's
I'm
good.
that way too. For me, this conversation, even towards the end, it's reminding me of like the value of like intergenerational conversations and relationships. You know, I just think we're so like separated with different age groups and cultures and demographics and locations, and so we miss out on like so much wisdom, you know, and life experience. And we think, oh, I read the books. Like, I know. Like, I read the memes. Like, I know. It's like, you have no idea until you spoke to someone that lived it, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And I think we really need more of that, you know, in our communities. Because there's so much more that we can learn, but if we just like speak to each other. And then even the changing the narrative, I think intergenerationally, I think narratives can change when we have community with those that we're in relationship with, but also that are from different generation groups. Yeah.
Senait Litchmore, honestly, this was rich for me. The problem is the problem. I think that that's such a good reminder. There's, you know, as we talked about parent wounds and the time, like it so rich. Thank you so much. This was really, really a great conversation for me. And one that I wrote a lot of notes down and when I'm going to process. I'm going to spend some time and take some space to actually thoughtfully think over what we talked about. Because again, even with me, you can do a podcast interview and then just zip ahead for the next thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's important also in anything that we do to kind of take a moment to go, what did I learn? God, are you speaking through this? what's the takeaway I can take away from. And I think that's important. I think that's the other thing I'm trying to learn is in every kind of moment, was there a learning? Was there something I missed because I was rushing? Did I not allow God to like speak through me, or for me to be an answer to prayer of somebody else? Like, I think that's it too. I think when we go and rush through things, we do miss the small miracles. We do miss us possibly being the answer to prayer to somebody, or somebody being the answer to prayer for us, and because we're so busy. And so thank you for this reminder. So good. So good.
It was an honor. It was a great conversation. Thanks for
Yeah,
having me, Melinda.
thank you. We'll have to have you back. So thank you so much, Senait, for being with me here on See Her Love.
My pleasure.